the outcrops of oil and gas seeping out of the ground and burning that had been lit by lightning. Well, so what's that got? Well, that's got nothing to do with this. Except, in Terra del Fuego, the producing interval has got a really neat, long geological name to it. I won't try to pronounce it. Anyway, the producing interval is only about 3 feet thick. But the interval in which hydrocarbons are stored is about 300 feet thick. So when I was doing my calculations, the numbers just didn't make any sense at all. I mean, here I was seeing stuff respond in just stupid, like duh kinds of time frames. And it dawned on me, wait a minute, maybe the problem is that the ratio of the thickness through which flow is occurring is different. This ratio is not 1. That the thickness with flow is different from the thickness in which there is storage. You say, yeah, well, I guess if, one's 3 feet, 30 feet, whatever, and the other's 10 or 100 times that, well, then, I was also, when I was with the pipeline company, responsible for their gas storage operations. We designed and operated a gas storage field up in central Oklahoma. I had done a fantastic job of doing the numerical simulation. It was good work, except junk. We put the field on production after loading the gas storage, loading it with gas, only to find out that within a matter of hours, literally, we had water breakthrough. Now, if any of you have got any experience from your field work with gas storage, that's not the right answer. If you don't know, like a height, where are you going to pull a saturation from? Water saturation. Well, that's why you run down the hall and talk to your log analyst.
But wouldn't that kind of give you a height because it's a certain percentage?
That's the problem, actually. Because the thickness that actually contains the hydrocarbons, you're going to calculate a water saturation and a porosity, for that matter, because both of them are tied together, that are based on what you perceive to be the thickness that storage occurs in. All right? And that's what was causing my trouble, because they had said, here's the thickness, here's the porosity, here's the water saturation. But when we looked at the performance of the well, the contribution of the interval was much, much thicker. Okay? Well, this other story about the gas storage reservoir, it was the other way around. Okay? So all of a sudden, I'm compelled to tell you, with all due respect to the log analysis process, which is important to do, but you've got to be so careful with it, because you will see cases where the thickness in which hydrocarbons are stored is radically different from the thickness through which they flow. All right? Wow. And I can tell you, here's the example on Terra del Fuego. Here's my gas storage experiment up near Alva, Oklahoma, both of which were just like crazy. A third one, and this is really the culmination of the story. If you go back and look at the history, you discover that a certain lecturer's name is rather intimately associated with the biogenic gas shallow Niobrara. And one of my clients had already drilled a large number of wells. At that time, the area was permitted for 40-acre spacing. That's okay. Well, on 40-acre spacing, what we would have expected to see at the life of these wells is they should have been in interference with one another. They weren't, not a one of them. This was a population of about 1,000 wells at this point. Not a single one of them was obviously in boundary-dominated pseudo-steady state flow yet. On 40-acre spacing, we knew, because of porosity crossover, which was the metric they had used, 40-acre spacing, did the calculations, didn't screw up, they got them right. Plug them in here because I know how soon it should reach the boundary. I had a real serious problem because none of the wells were in pseudo-steady state yet. Whoa, something wrong here. I knew the KH, because I knew the H, because I'd taken it from my porosity crossover. I knew the storage thickness. It was equal. Done. Except, if that were true, that equation should have indicated that I was in pseudo-steady state, and it didn't do it. That wasn't what was happening. What did I do wrong? Well, here the wells were on 40s, so I knew exactly what volume they had to connect to, because there was the offset wells, all 8 of them, and there was not interference. They were not talking to each other yet. Ugh, this is not pretty. What I did, just as a fluke, it was just one of those dumb luck things, I decided to calculate my thickness based on the gamma ray instead of on porosity. I plugged that thickness in, and I said, okay, the flow thickness is the porosity crossover, the storage thickness is the gamma ray. And all of a sudden it all made sense. It was like, wow. The gamma ray is the shales, the crappy rock, the country, the faraway stuff, and the sand, which has porosity crossover, is my superhighway. I was suddenly compelled to understand, here's a really good example. Eastern Colorado, the area out around Byers, Ray, Burlington, that area. The flow thickness was predicted by the porosity crossover. The amount of gas in place was predicted by the gamma ray. We say, well, so what? Well, so what is this? My client had done all of their economics based on the porosity crossover thickness. And they had concluded that the field was about to be abandoned until we did this calculation and realized that there was at least a 5-fold greater EUR than what they had attributed to it. Wow. I mean, anytime you can walk into a client and say, hey, dude, I'm going to raise your estimated ultimate recovery by 5-fold, what do you think happens? They're pretty happy with you. They like you. Until you tell them, oh, by the way, now you've got to do something about it. That's the other part of the question. Well, the reason I want you to wrestle with this, I have become convinced, absolutely convinced, that we have categorically done a fantastic job of studying the superhighways, and we have not in any way, shape, or form begun to investigate the gamma ray of the junky rock. That's what we call a shale play. That's why we're calling these things resource plays. We don't understand them, but they're a really important piece of the study. Okay? That shallow Niobrara was a good starting point for that discussion. Do you understand? Do you kind of begin to get a sense of what dimensionless time is? All right? It's that Porsche versus the suburban experiment. But the reason it's important is not because of the theory of it so much as it becomes a crucial piece of our understanding about how this straight line equation works. All right? Because if the straight line equation doesn't work, then all of this stuff falls apart. So that story, the issue about the thicknesses, really is a core piece of this discussion. All right? You okay with that? Going once, going twice. I don't see any heads going this way. That worries me a little bit. You okay? This is pretty fundamental. I need for you to, if you're having problems with it, now's the chance. Okay? Please, questions, concerns, comments? Well, it raises a point. Let me pick up one other thread while we're beating up on it. Remember my tirade about this idea of viscosity. Okay, we talked about viscosity, shaking the fluid and all that stuff. The von Karman viscosity belongs in there because as a system ages, the contribution of gas, water, and oil changes, and therefore the apparent viscosity of the system changes. However, where? We're just going to talk about what? Who, when, how, where, and what? The 5 W's. Let's see. Who, when, where. We're doing, that's 3. What? That's 4. How? How? Okay, what? Well, why is because I'm money hungry. So the why's off the table. Send money. Easy. What's this one here? How? It doesn't have a W. Oh yeah, that's the, oh they must spell it must be W-O-H. Bad joke. You're awake again. What is that viscosity that goes in that slot? It's the far field viscosity. It is not the viscosity near the wellbore. Now let's think about that a minute. Let's wrestle with that idea just a second. When I'm looking at the pressure wave moving through the system, way over here at the wellbore, probably had some fluid fall down off the surface, and I shut the well, I got some oil here, some wax, some scale, just all kinds of junk over here at the wellbore. And for a little ways out into the reservoir, I've got a fairly severe skin because of the imbibition of the water and stuff, and the damage and what have you. But out here, 2 or 3 feet away, and certainly for the next fairly long distance, I've got a far field situation. What I'm measuring is the far field behavior. So it really raises an important idea. When I think about multiphase flow systems, which they all are, my thesis is they all are to some degree. If I'm thinking about a multiphase flow system, and I realize that my original assumption about d psi dx as a constant, well, it's constant here, it's constant here, oops, it changed, right? Because I had fluids here and a different set of fluids out there. What should I expect that system to look like? I want to analyze a multiphase flow environment, but I'm using arguably single-phase flow to model it. Well, that shouldn't work. Yeah, but I keep getting good answers. Yeah, that's a problem. Why? Well, because when I look at the near reservoir stuff, that pressure wave moves through this so quickly, matter of minutes, hours at the most. This damage area has a transient that goes through it. When you look at Horner plots, it's not uncommon. You'll see Horner plots, depending on where you plot it, a piece of H, and your pressure. You'll see Horner plots that do that. That's a very common signature. You know what that is? When that signature evolves, when that occurs, that's the damage. That's the damage zone. And if you calculate based on those two slopes, you calculate that, you can actually calculate a direct calculation of the size of the damage area. It looks like a skin, because that's what it is. And once you're into the far field, this part of the signature, you're looking at that multiphase flow system in a very different way. Okay, so that's what I would expect to be the case here. Near the wellbore, I'm going to have very different values for compressibility and viscosity, and well perm. But those are going to look like a skin. They're going to look like damage or enhancement near the wellbore. Far field, well, that's one of the neat things about it. In the far field, those change very slowly. Near the wellbore, they can change really fast. I mean, literally in a matter of hours or minutes. But in the far field, they change very slowly. So the effect of it is, I can use this theory, as long as I understand what I'm doing, I can use this theory to model, to approximate multiphase flow systems. Okay, let's think about fracture conductivity. This is a picture of a lateral with, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stages. Have you looked at microseismic yet? Have you spent any time dealing with microseismic stuff? Well, what this is, they've got this right here. This line right here represents the observation well. And in the observation well, they have placed a series of quote-unquote microphones, basically seismic microphones. They magnetically attached to the casing wall. And so what they're doing is receiving the sound as the rock cracks. Well, that's not quite right. The literature says that's what's happening. I don't agree with that. They are receiving the sound of when the rock moves. Well, that includes the possibility of it cracking or existing fractures moving relative to one another. Okay? So you see both. So this swarm, like this one, those are the sound events associated with pumping the frac job into that set of perfs. Wow. But look, I mean, yeah, sort of, kind of, it's planar, but it clearly is not a single smooth surface. Now, sometimes you do see that, but very rarely. Very rarely. this guy. Here's two different stages sitting right close to each other in an obvious cloud of events. Well, it raises a really important point. If those sound events, the P and S waves, as the geophysicists like to talk about it, if the P and the S waves are being created by the movement of a rock relative to another piece of rock, pop, snapple, crack, Rice Krispies. All of a sudden, I am compelled to understand that my frac job did not create a uniform, single wind, da-da-da, symmetric, all those assumptions. It's a mass of events out there, and invariably, those events are associated with places where the rock is discontinuous. It's got a fracture in it. I may have created it, or the service company, or Mother Nature put it there to begin with. But the beauty of it is, it's there, and it's complex. All right? So I am suddenly confronted with the fact that all of our theory is based on an assumption that reality does not support. Because this is reality. This is what's happening because those events are measured. And they use a fairly rigorous noise detection system, what have you, to make sure that what they're reporting is credible. So it really raises a tough problem for us when we think about classic well testing. I'm going to measure the behavior of this thing to try to calculate a fracture length. Oh. That. Oops. I have a bit of a problem on my hands. Because that's what's happening, and this is the model I'm using. And that's why I got all nuts this morning about talking to you about effective fracture length, created, propped, and apparent. What I'm going to calculate is an apparent length bearing no relationship necessarily to what actually happened in the system. All right? So when I talk about fracture conductivity, here's that issue that we talked about a while ago about the different thicknesses arising again. You go look in the textbook, look in Lee's book, look in Matthews, look in Russell, look in Hassan and Kabir. Let's see, what are those? That gets into Erlacher's work. That definition is in there every place, based on the assumption of a symmetric two-wing fracture. And unfortunately, microseismic says that's really cool, that's neat, and there's no relationship to the real world. So, how do I do this? Well, there's a really important piece to this. I am proud to tell you that one of my former clients sent me data sets on a group of 3 wells in which they were really proud of pumping 4 million pounds of proppant in each well. And I found they wanted me to evaluate them and tell them what a good job they did. You did a good job, Fred. Way to go. The 4 million pounds of proppant were 4 million pounds of talcum powder. And they thought talcum powder was a proppant. Well, sick as that is, if you do this calculation, if you go through the traditional models, part of our literature, their conclusion, the execution of what they did, works right. The sad news is, talcum powder is not a proppant. It really isn't. And that was the consequence. When you calculate the effective apparent fracture rate, it was 0. It was as if they had never done anything to the wells. Within 6 months, the wells were dead, and all 3 of them are now abandoned because of this misconception about what this thing means. This is simply a construction. It's an approximation of what really happens. And if you misuse it, you will make some bad engineering decisions. Well, those 4 million pound frac jobs represented the total cost of around $45 million. Not to say that they didn't also lose the lease, because they did. So just the loss from the well cost, each well was about $15 million all up. Dang, that's not cool. I screwed up my calculation because I didn't think through the physical meaning of what it was I was doing. All right? Here's the story. Oh! Golly Moses, I wish you hadn't done that to me so late in the day. Oh, geez. Oh, that hurt. Yeah, well. Whoa, wait a minute. I'm out. Wonderful question. Packers Plus hired me to do an evaluation, and the bad news was I could not tell that there was a difference between their procedures and the sliding sleeve techniques. But the bottom line is, obviously, physically, cost-wise, time-wise, there's some major differences. In terms of well performance, I could not observe that there was. Say again? Oh, they claim that there is. Yeah, and that's why they didn't call me back. They called hard facts. I knew what they wanted me to tell them, and I had to tell them what I saw. Yep. Yes, sir.
So, I mean, what are your thoughts on open hole completion?
Well, I'll give you another piece of telling anecdotes. This condition, virtually none of you have this condition except voluntarily, it appears. Well, one or two. That's a different condition. I acquired this because the doors jambs are too short, right? No, this is because I've had all of these events occur. Several years ago, I was doing an evaluation for a client in Midland, and they had drilled several horizontal wells. And several of you with your experience at Roswell will really tie into this. Anyway, I had looked at these horizontal wells, and they looked great. And then, as they ended their life, their production history, they just looked horrible. They were looking like they had never had any completion effectiveness at all. Gone away. And so okay, that's okay, I'm used to that. But what I noticed was, every one of these wells, this was like 10 wells, every one of these wells had this failure in performance occur within about a 10-day period. Why would a population of 10 wells suddenly, hey Fred, I'm about to die, all of like they were talking to each other? Whatever. I mean, it didn't make sense, but every one of them showed this damage event, a specific event, within 10 days of the other wells. I mean, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't fly. Quite as a fluke, I happened to be talking to a friend of mine at the National Earthquake Center there in Golden, and I said, I'm looking at these wells, and I'll make up the date, August 3rd. After August 3rd, they all failed. And he said, hey, wait a minute. He went back, got out his earthquake records. On August the 2nd, I make up the date, there was an earthquake, it was like magnitude 6, about 50 miles from Roswell. The earthquake collapsed the open holes, and when the open holes collapsed, they were no longer effective production. Now, by contrast, open hole completions in vertical wells, which are not subject to the same stress fields, are very effective. Lateral open holes are dangerous. In fact, very rarely now, in my experience, virtually none of the operators will have open hole laterals. They'll have liners or they'll cement them. So virtually all of them have some kind of stabilization of the lateral. So open hole laterals, I think, are not wise. Open hole verticals actually are very effective. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. All right. But it really is driven by this. I mean, I really believe that microseismic is going to become the order of the day in terms of looking at well performance. Oh no, back here. Well, with all silliness aside, look at this. This equation up here, the very top one, y equals mx plus b. Oh, that's the equation of a straight line. Y equals mx plus b. That's a straight line. Y equals, mx, and b is 0. Wonderful. All three of the fundamental mathematical theoretical relationships that we're looking for, that we're going to use in their simple form, are equations of straight lines. I really think the human race is able to see straight lines especially effectively because 90 or 100,000 years ago, it's not offending anybody who doesn't believe in evolution, 90 or 100,000 years ago, my 47th cousin twice removed on my grandmother's side was pretty good at throwing spears, and her husband learned to recognize that that straight line is coming at me. Yeah, we got pretty good at it. Ta-da! There it is, right there. I can see a straight line, or I can see when it's not a straight line quite effectively. And I now know that there is a body of theory that says that if the system is behaving in a theoretically consistent manner, it should exhibit a straight line in one of these settings. Ooh, that's a home run. I just set before you a very compelling goal statement for the theoretically consistent system. So, that opens a whole new door. I am now interested in looking, this is what I refer to as my Agatha Christie novel. Up to this point, we've been off in the weeds, theoretically. But now, you know, Agatha Christie, I absolutely love those novels that she wrote. They're just so cool. Murder on the Orient Express, to me, is just one of the best there is. I just love that story. It's all nice and contorted, and you never know until that guy walks in the compartment on the train, you know, it's like, oh, this is awesome. Well, anyway, enough, but you know where I'm going. I know that I'm stuck with my train. I know that I'm stuck in a snowdrift. I know all these facts, and then reality sets in. A friend of mine, and it's a really pertinent statement, a friend of mine on his letters would always sign at the bottom line of his letters, in theory, practice and theory are the same. In practice, they're not. Boy, ain't that the truth. Applies here. Here's the theory. This is the theory. It's robust. I can go through the derivation. I know exactly what assumptions I made. I know how I got here. Now, when I apply that framework, that skeleton, there it is. I know exactly what it is. So my task is to compare what really happened to what the theory says could have happened. Well, that really helps. And that was the reason John Lee made such a big deal about the petroleum resource management system. Because his goal was, I've got a skeleton, I know what it is, I know when it's reasonable and when it's not. And then unfortunately politics kicked in. But the bottom line is this. When I look at the behavior in the pseudo-steady state, I'm doing nothing but a mass balance. That equation right there. The initial density minus the current average density times the floor volume equals the pounds of stuff removed from the system. Well, wait a minute. Oh, that's kind of nice. That doesn't say, actually, that I removed it because I didn't tell you that the sign on Q was positive. Q could be negative. So I could talk about systems in which injection was occurring. We know those as water flow. I'm in good shape. So this equation is nothing but that equation with basically this group converted to this idea of the pseudopotential. Right? And then I took the stuff over here, that stuff, and divided by it. Now, that's not that big a deal. We've already gone through, I'm not going to go through the blood, guts, and chicken feathers because in 37409 or 49223, you can find my derivations. Or you look in Lee's book, or you look in Hassan Kabir, you look at Erlacher, you can find those derivations are all over the place. The only difference between my derivation and the classic theory that is used in well testing was that statement, the derivative of psi sub d divided by x sub d equals a constant. The change in dimensionless pressure over dimensionless distance is a constant that is a function of the geometry of the system. It's the only difference. The only difference. Because you wind up with the classic equations, and all of a sudden you're confronted with the fact these equations, and then you go read Carslaw and Yeager, these equations are not constrained to a fixed rate or a fixed pressure or a circular flow geometry. Wow. That's pretty powerful. Because what I have just confronted you with is the fact, this top equation, let me get my pointer right, my arm's not quite that long, I won't do it out now. That equation, if you read Carson Law and Yeager, page 32, that equation describes the behavior of elliptical flow systems without a constraint on the aspect ratio of the ellipse. Breathe. Hey, I'm just a junior. Don't lay that stuff on me. You're just a junior. No, that doesn't apply. You are trying to sit in your shoes. I'm trying to get a picture of how these physical systems behave. And what I've just told you is the math that is well established as being a preeminent book on the transient behavior of systems says that expression right there, or its more general expression where the log is replaced by the E1 function, that expression describes the behavior of elliptical systems that are anisotropic without limit. Wow, that is just a home run, because then in the limit, when the aspect ratio becomes infinite,